Hello, everyone, and welcome to another video here on the Sports Daily Media Network YouTube channel. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. I've got Mike Koomar with me. And Mike, it's time for the Big 12 tournament. We're going to recap a little bit of the action this weekend, but then we're going to get into the tournament in Kansas City, what Big 12 storylines are going into that, and then what we think will happen. Mike, we didn't have a ton of influential games this weekend in the Big 12, but one of them that is definitely going to be important for seeding, that's BYU. They hosted Christian Anderson and Texas Tech, and the Cougars got a much needed victory. It had been tough sledding there for a little bit. They do have two nice wins since Richie Saunders got injured, but there's been a couple of ugly losses too. This one, they trailed early, but they dug their heels in and they got the job done. How important was this one for BYU?
Yeah, this one was huge, especially when you look at they had lost three straight, and two of those games were really, really ugly losses. I mean, UCF, they only lost by 13, but it felt like they lost by a million in that one if you actually watched it.
Yeah, it was
And then
never
same
close.
with Cincinnati losing by over 20 points to a Cincinnati team that pretty much doesn't have a chance at an at-large bid anymore. But look, huge comeback there after losing four or five. They've got a couple of big wins. I think the big issue with BYU, similar issue I have actually with Texas Tech, who's on the other side of this game, is just lack of consistency since Richie Saunders is out. It's clear that, he might not have been the best player on that team, but I think he's actually the most impactful player on that team. And
Definitely.
you look at, his ability to control the game with the experience that he has. Obviously, DeBonsa is the leader in points per game and whatnot, but clearly the most impactful there. So with that being said, BYU, they're going to have a pretty easy first game. They do get the 10 seed in this tournament, and they're going to have to play Kansas State, and they'll probably get an easy win there. But with that being said, talking about their win on Saturday, man, they really needed this to improve their seed line because they were drifting awfully close to a 10 line.
And I don't really know what to think about BYU, Mike, because they've now had 5 games without Richie Saunders. They're 2-3. They've beaten the two best teams they've played, and they've lost to the three worst. Now, none
Yeah,
of these games
two
have
of them they
been
got crushed.
none of these
Yeah,
games have been particularly easy. You play three tournament teams and two teams on the road that are not tournament teams, but they're not super far off. So I don't really know what to make of this BYU team going into the tournament. Like, I think they've done enough to stay in the field clearly because they picked up two huge wins, but we've seen committees punish teams that are not bringing their whole roster to the tournament, and BYU won't since Richie Saunders is out. So I don't really know how the committee's going to look at this team. And the Big 12 tournament might be kind of important for how the committee views this team. Like you said, I think the path is pretty favorable. Kansas State and potentially West Virginia. I know West Virginia just beat them, but I would think that BYU should win if they play again. But we
yeah.
talked about it on the other video for a second, but I don't think it's really possible for BYU to get an 8 or a 9 seed because they would have to be in the West or the South region, which is looking like it's going to be Arizona and Florida right now. And you'd have to, obviously, they can't be in Arizona's region because of Big 12. So they'd have to be in the South region if they're an 8 or a 9. And Florida's going to pick a location that plays on Friday and Sunday. So I think it might be
Yeah,
7 or 10 seed for BYU. And if they don't look great in the Big 12 tournament, I could see them getting dragged down to the 10.
and why that matters is because Brigham Young has a rule where they don't play
Mm-hmm.
athletic events on Sundays, at least for the most part. They have had a couple NCAA tournament games over the years, but even the committee tries to respect that out of BYU. You look at the resume, look, seven quad one wins. They're 7-8 in quad one, 6-2 in quad two. So look, the resume is there in terms of quality wins. The issue is that they've had some losses in quad one that they just shouldn't have had. Cincinnati loss quad one was pretty bad, and that was really ugly. And then you looked at that Oklahoma State loss on the road and that loss to UCF. That's what's really driving their seed line down right now. But with that being said, I think they're definitely somewhere between that 7 to 10 range, depending on where the committee decides to do. But also a big part of that's going to be how they show up in the tournament. If they're able to get to the quarterfinals, they get wins over Kansas State and then West Virginia. I'll feel a lot better about them getting a potential 7 seed. But right now, look, I think that West Virginia game is really going to be big for their seed line because West Virginia, they're still a team that maybe they're kind of removed from the bubble now, but they're still lurking around.
And they're still not a bad team. And I'd have to look at
Yeah,
exactly. It's probably a quad two game, but in terms of
it
BYU, Mike,
is.
I did put on Bart Torvik. You can put rankings between dates. I put in February 14th, which was the Colorado game, which is where Richie Saunders tore his ACL in the first minute or so of the game. And since then, BYU is 70th in the country. That and they're
Yeah.
3-4. It includes the victory against Colorado in overtime at home, but this is a little bit alarming, to be honest with you. I didn't think it would be this low, but I can see them getting dragged down because of that in terms of seeding. You might look at it and be like, well, wait, BYU might be a top 25 team. They were 16-1 at one point in the middle of January. So
Yeah.
they're 5-9 in their last 14 games. They Saunders is probably their best defender. When you take a good defender off a bad defending team, it gets worse. And it has here. They still have 4 WABs, so that is something that will push them away from basically any team anywhere near the bubble. But they were at, let's see here, they were at 4.2 WAB at the
Yeah.
Colorado game. So they've essentially played like a bubble team since then without Richie Saunders. So I think that is probably the biggest storyline that I'm looking at here in this tournament. And then in terms of other teams, Mike, I think the way that this is set up, I don't know if we can see like a true bid steal situation or somebody that's kind of off the picture playing themselves in. But there are some teams here without like a total win or win the whole thing and get in or go home. I think Cincinnati might be able to get um, you might be able to get a bit if they can beat Utah, UCF, and Arizona. But what are some storylines other than BYU that you were looking at when the teams get to Kansas City?
Yeah, look, I think one team I'm obviously a little biased that I think you want to look out for is the Baylor Bears. Look, this is a team right now, they're ranked 13th. They're way out of the picture in terms of March Madness. But you look at a team that has gotten a lot better since they've gone to a four-guard spread with Isaac Williams leading as the point. He's become the de facto point guard for the Bears this year. They've got 2 guys that are going to be drafted in the first round of the NBA draft and they've finally started to kind of build a shell around them and recognize, look, Najee is not going to be the answer. Down low, he's playing very few minutes. The big issue for the Bears right now has been do they have the stamina and the longevity to finish a game? Look, they were up by double digits against Arizona and they were up with 3 minutes to go in that game. They were up for 34 minutes against Houston in that game earlier this week. They ended up losing by 13. Both of those games, their record the final score was not indicative of how that game was played. They lost to Iowa State by 3 points on the road. They barely lost to BYU, a game that they were also up by double digits in. This is a team that seems to have been playing significantly better coming down the stretch. And if they can get hot and stay hot in the second half, that's really key for the Bears. They might be able to do some damage. Look, they're going to have to first get a win against Arizona State, a team that's proven to be pesky coming down the stretch before going to play Iowa State. They had played pretty well against Iowa State in Ames this year. This is going to be a similar road crowd vibe for this one. So they're going to have to beat that. And then look, Texas Tech, we've talked about them briefly, very inconsistent so far this season. Look, if Baylor can win those 3 games, including 2 quad 1A wins against Iowa State and Texas Tech, look, you never know. We're talking about them being on the bubble probably with 19 wins and 6 quad 1, 6 quad 2 wins, especially when they have had the 6th toughest strength of schedule in the entirety of college basketball. So I think you want to look out for the Bears. You never know what Scott Drew can draw up here in March.
I think they've been playing much better, and I just don't think that their legs are going to hold up. If they didn't hold up
Yeah.
in regular game, I don't know. I think they might. Let's say I think they'll beat Arizona State. I think they probably lead in the second half against Iowa State, but I don't think it's Iowa State's not a team to play when you're not sharp, and I think
Yeah.
they'll just be enough there. But in terms of the top four, I don't think they have a whole lot to play for. To be honest with you, I don't think Houston can get that final number one seed. I don't think Texas Tech could probably puncture the two line. Maybe if some other teams lose to some teams that they shouldn't. But I think Texas Tech is on that 3-4. And then with Kansas, look, they already have a bunch of good wins, which is pulling their resume up a little bit. But, I don't know after, there's no like real team like really close to the bubble in this league. There's some where if they, get to Saturday or Saturday's final, if they get to Friday, maybe we reevaluate and see where they're at. But um, other than BYU, I think this isn't going to matter a whole lot to most of the teams.
Yeah, I think the only team that you have to watch out for that is teetering towards the bubble would be UCF. You look at they've struggled significantly coming down the stretch. They're not the same team that they have been at parts this year. They had that loss to Baylor at home. I don't did they win this weekend? I think they lost this weekend as well. Um,
They, yeah, three in a row. They
but
lost in Morgantown.
Yeah, so that's three losses in a row. That's teetering towards the outside looking in. As long as they win their opening game, I think they're probably fine. But that's going to play. They're probably going to play against a Cincinnati team that's playing with house money that also has been trending up in the Big 12. Look, I think there's a lot of teams in the Big 12 that could come out of nowhere in this tournament. I think Cincinnati is certainly one of those schools as well. You look at their road. Look, Arizona's not really playing for much. Um, and if Cincinnati could go pick off a win against UCF, pick off a win against Arizona, and they find themselves on Friday night playing against Texas Tech or Iowa State, look, we'll see what happens. If they could pick off that game and get to the finals, you never know, Sean. You
Yeah,
just
that would.
never know in this league. And there's so many teams that are so competitive. And coming down the stretch, look, Cincinnati's 47th right now in the net. They pick out three quad one wins. You just never know.
Yeah, and Cincinnati did just beat UCF by 20 in the beginning of February in
Yeah.
uh, in Ohio. Look, I think Cincinnati's probably just like three good wins off. They're minus 1.6 WAB, which is not enough, even in a year that WAB is down. But look, those three wins off the top of my head would probably be pretty close to 2 to 2.5 WABs. So that would get them on the positive side, and who knows? We have seen teams come out of nowhere like Texas last year in the SEC that were totally out going into the tournament. They win three games, two of them against good opposition, and then we all know what happened with Texas at the first four. So yeah, I think at the very minimum they would have to get to Friday for any chance. And then in terms of UCF, Mike, I think their wins are just too good to leave them out, and their numbers
Yeah.
do not suggest that they should be on the bubble. Not in a good way. They're 57th in Torvik. They are, let's see here. They're 51st in the
51st in the
net.
net, though.
They've got five quad one wins though, and
Yeah.
their resume is in the mid 30s, which that'll get them in terms of selection. But if they roll into the tournament with like predictives in the 60s after losing another game to a non-tournament team, and a couple bid steals happen, they could get thrown into Dayton. And
Yeah.
that is not something that I hope for Johnny Dawkins or the Knights, because they've had too good of a season for that.
I agree. It's just like these last few games have really come to bite them back. They don't have the same strength of schedule that some of these other Big 12 teams do have. But like you said, they have that win against Kansas early on in the season. They've got that big win
Texas
against Texas
Tech.
Tech as well at home, and then the road win against Brigham Young. So those are really the three ones that are propelling them forward. They got to that 20 win mark, so they should be theoretically in good shape.
Yeah, I haven't.
But look, I also would say with Cincinnati, back to them, you never know. That's a team that's 47th in the net right now. So if they can pick off a couple of Q1 wins, specifically a couple of Q1A wins, they could rise up that net really quickly and get to 40th. And then you're having a real conversation.
Yeah, and they, let's see, top 50 and neutral is a quad one. So UCF would actually not be there. They're 51st, and if you end up
Yeah,
beating
they're
them, they're
not.
going to go
They're
down.
worse than Baylor and Cincinnati
So that's a
in the
little bit
net.
unfortunate for Cincinnati that there's not another Q1 game on the table for them. They would
Yeah.
have to beat Arizona to get one, and then they'd be in the semis. Yeah, so that would be tough. But of course, I haven't really done the deep dive into UCF yet, along with the bubble teams. Now, obviously, I look at the spreadsheet that people can see on here. And then when it comes to the bubble teams, I do go deeper into it with, who did they actually beat and when. And I haven't really had to do that with them. I don't think they've had any personnel issues to excuse some of these losses, but UCF, you beat Cincinnati, you're not going to be anywhere near the bubble. So hopefully they can
No.
do it. All right,
Yeah.
Mike, we're going to wrap it up here. One final thought. What are your thoughts on the glass courts?
Yeah, the glass courts are crazy. It's a little bit too much there in Kansas City. We've already heard my rants over the years about why the Big 12 tournament should not be played in Kansas City. And now on top of that, Brett Yormark's got to add some more, WWE kind of cringe element to the Big 12. I think that's my biggest frustration with the Big 12 is that it's kind of become a gimmick conference between partnering with the WWE, the glass courts now. It's not not good for what is the best conference in college basketball to be get sucked into gimmicks. The final thing that I'll say, look, is this conference championship could go anywhere. But if I had to pick a team right now, I'm going to pick the Houston Cougars. They seem to be the most solid top to bottom, and they play really good defense. I just think Kansas is too inconsistent right now for me to pick them to go win this tournament.
I'm going to go with Iowa State. I just think that they, obviously, with the hometown crowd, they're playing early in the day for at least the first two games. So I
Yeah.
think they'll get some butts and seats for those, and I think they will win this tournament. But all right, Mike, we are going to wrap it up here. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into this video. Please be sure to check out the other ones if you haven't already, and we'll see you next time.